Hello everyone, this is the Wandering Ranger, and you're listening to my very first video essay that I'm going to be putting on this YouTube channel. And essentially what I wanted you all to know is essentially that these video essays are going to be geared towards you getting to know me a little bit better, getting to know my personal philosophies, theology, viewpoints, all of that. So I hope that this kind of will help you get an understanding of who I am and the values that I have. I thought it was important and prudent for my very first video essay to do it on Tolkien. After all, he is the one who has the most inspiration, and so for that, I want to get into it. So here is my video essay on why I love J.R.R. Tolkien. I can still remember it like it was yesterday. I was 15 years old. I had come across this book in the library. It was called Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. Now, I had remembered hearing about this. I knew there was this other book that he had written called The Hobbit. And I remember before I read The Hobbit and before I read The Lord of the Rings, I had seen the cartoon show The Hobbit. I thought to myself, if this is anything like The Hobbit, I'm going to really like it. So I read it. I was in the midst of getting ready to start my first year in high school. Unlike a lot of other kids, I was a year ahead of them, so I was already 15 when I started high school. I went to the library a lot because I was a small kid. I was 89 pounds, 90 pounds, something like that. I was 5'3", 5'2". I was skinny, scrawny, and I was definitely small. A lot of the kids thought I was weird, and I admit that I probably was a bit weird. The girls, they probably didn't really thought I was something special. I mean, I looked, after all, like I was 10. So I found solace in the library, going to my high school library, and picking up books and checking them out and reading them. In fact, it wasn't until I got into high school and I was able to access the high school library that I really began to become the voracious reader that I would end up becoming. And I'm thankful for it to this day. I remember the first time I picked up the Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring book. It was quite remarkable. For the first time, I felt there was a character that I could identify with, Frodo Baggins. What it meant to be like a hobbit, to be small, to feel unimportant, to feel like my life wasn't as important as other people's. I felt that connection to the Hobbit. I continued to become blown away by the characters that were being introduced slowly but surely. And by the end of reading the first book, I knew that I was hooked. But as I would become an older person and as I would begin to study more and more the work of Tolkien, and the more I would become fascinated with it, it wasn't until I became an adult that the fundamental values of Tolkien's work would have a greater impact on me. I remember being 20-something years old when 20 years old when the first Lord of the Rings movie came out, The Fellowship of the Ring. And I felt that it was quite the remarkable event, even though they didn't have one of my favorite characters, Tom Bombadil, in it. The book and the movies exhumed things that I felt about the world, things that I wanted to feel about the world. And it did it in a very exciting and epic way. So, the first and foremost reason why I love J.R.R. Tolkien is that I love the immense world that he created. I love the works and the characters and the stories that he took such a long time to develop and create. I like the fact that as I started to learn more about Tolkien, I understood that even though he did not intend The Hobbit at its first publishing to be any kind of prequel, he saw the connections right away. He always thought he could make his work more meaningful, more deeper, and he invested so much into it. And while he was very much interested in creating a new myth for England, I think there was something greater at work in his work. I think he really truly understood myth from an understanding of how it meant universally to us all as human beings. And while he would never straight away would make an allegory for his beliefs or his life values, it's no doubt in my mind that his work was infused by his philosophies. And the more I read his biographies and the more I would continue to learn everything I could about him, I continued to be blown away by his dedication to not only telling a good story, but to preserving the values that he felt were being under threat in the world. There's almost a pure understanding of the way the world should be. He has a simple view of the world. The idea that a person should be able to enjoy a nice evening in the country with smoking their tobacco pipe and having a nice glass of ale and a nice big meal, that might seem like a hokey element to his book, but it actually, as I learned, kind of exhumed a lot of what he felt. He wanted ordinary people to be the ones who were the heroes of his stories. That's why he made ordinary people his heroes. The hobbits, like, they symbolized the iconic country farer yokel who, from many other people's standards, is ignorant. But yet there's a simpleness to their life. The more I read it, I realized that Tolkien's values of how he saw the world were infused in the cultures that he created. And the hobbits, probably more than anybody else, any other creatures or characters in the books, exemplify what he thinks is purely the ideal life. And yet, there is something great and grand in this, because even for someone like Frodo, who has a great life, there is something more for him. And as it was for his Uncle Bilbo, technically his cousin, but his Uncle Bilbo. This is something that made me realize that he was not just telling us a story for our mere enjoyment, but rather he was speaking truth to the world as he saw it. Everything he saw was infused in that. So not only do I like J.R.R. Tolkien because his works are amazing and epic, they're also imbued with this ideology that we can all organize our lives around. The idea that the simple things in life are sometimes the best, and that the way to preserve the simple things in life is by going on an adventure occasionally, getting out of our comfort zone sometimes, having to work with a diverse group of people that we may not always understand or get, and being willing to have the courage to face our fears and our prejudices in order to overcome a greater obstacle. When you start to see these things as you pull back, you realize that every little story within the Lord of the Rings and within the Cimmerian and the Hobbit represent a greater colloquial view of the world. You understand that Tolkien's work is essential for living. And as I've studied and as I've put on, as you will, the ideology of Tolkien, and I started to see the things and the people who inspired him, it became very clear that his work was not just about pure fantasy. And he scoffed at anyone telling anyone that his books were about escapism. Like C.S. Lewis, they both understood the power of myth and the essential fundamental truths that come from telling a good story. You see, storytelling is essential to telling something fundamental about the world. And in order to be a good storyteller, you have to find something that is objectively true. That's so counterproductive and counterintuitive and so against our current culture. Nowadays, we're told that in order to make something meaningful, we have to make it relative. We have to make it something that everybody can identify with. And while obviously people are going to identify with characters who have their same skin color or their own religion or their own gender or their own orientation, the reality of it is this, that the true stories in the world, the greatest stories in the world, will always revolve around fundamental truths. There is a understanding that myth connects to everyone, not because it represents everyone in their specific individuality, but that it connects us all in the fact that we are all fundamentally part of something greater, something that binds us, something that creates in us an ideal vision of how we should live our lives. And so therefore we can see that for good storytelling you have to have an objective truth. You have to hold to an objective reality. And Tolkien works does this. This is Tolkien doing this for us. And so we see that because of, in recent days, the rise of postmodernism, and in my next video essay will be dealing with this issue, but we see this notion of art taking a back seat, or being offended, or being assaulted, or being subjected to new philosophies which fundamentally strip away from things. The idea is this, that we have to find beauty in everything. We have to find meaning in everything. And that if everything has meaning and everything has beauty, the problem is that, and this is the truth about relativism, is that you ultimately diminish what you are trying to preserve. And Alan Tolkien understood this, and it was very fundamental to his worldview and how he wrote the works that he did. So I love him, and I love his philosophy because it makes sense of the greater world. And now in our world, as we have been besieged with postmodernism, Tolkien's work and his philosophies are a refreshing medicine to all of that. So not only do you discover great stories and great characters and deeper meanings of the world, but you get an antidote to the chaos of our time through his work. I love Tolkien because he was able to take all the things that I love and all the things that I value and tell a invigorating story. It's true that by a lot of people's standards, Tolkien's values and ideas are no longer relevant. They are for a lost generation and a lost world and a lost culture that no longer seems to be willing to engage in the kind of things that Tolkien would want us to. But that's the brilliance of Tolkien. His work has allowed us to fundamentally come back to it all and rediscover these things through his characters and his stories. That is the great brilliance of it, and that's why I love him. That's why I love his works. That's why I love his books. They all fundamentally say the same thing. They all bring us back. And when you read his books, you can engage in it. And the idea of allowing ourselves to become so lost in the world that he created, enough to that we can then find that kind of identity, idyllic identity in his work, and that we can strive to live the life of the hobbit, shall we say, is a refreshing thing. Because we didn't know what a hobbit was before Tolkien. And yet he was able to make us all want to be a hobbit to some degree. He made us remember that our past had something of meaning. And that there is an ideal to life that we can all find something in. This is my first video essay, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'll talk to you later.